That was the best rendition of Kumbaya I've ever heard. Thank you so much for sharing. I know this is not from where Pastor Kirsty or I or Alex or anyone else usually preaches, but I am going to preach from up here just because that way I'm not in the middle of the bells. I will be over here. So today we are celebrating United Women in Faith Sunday. I chose Tabitha or Dorcas as the woman who moved mountains. The characteristic is service. Hopefully by the time I finish with the sermon, you'll go, oh, I understand why. But I knew I was going to choose Dorcas or Tabitha as the woman, even if I didn't know what the characteristic was going to be. Because when I first started getting involved in the United Methodist Church, there was a Dorcas circle. And I thought, that is the oddest name for anything that I've ever heard, until I learned about Dorcas. And so Dorcas will lead us today. We don't know much about Dorcas or Tabitha, so I'm going to set her aside just for a moment. What we do know is that she was involved with widows in the area of Joppa. Widows during this time in the ancient Near East were particularly vulnerable. For the most part, employment outside of the home for women was unheard of, so married women relied on their husbands for support. Unmarried women either lived with their parents or took to the streets, if you know what I mean. However, the one line of respectable, allowable work available to women was that of a seamstress. This is how this group of women, of widows in Joppa, are supporting themselves. They are seamstresses. The other thing that we know, or let me ask this, how many of you ladies in here are seamstresses? Or do anything with quilting or anything with fabric? It's really cheap, isn't it? Oh, I can tell from the laughter that it's not cheap. No, it's not cheap. It's expensive. And it was expensive even back then. You had to buy the fabric. Most of the time it wasn't just, it didn't just appear out of thin air. It wasn't just given to you. You had to purchase it. So one of the speculations from church scholars or biblical scholars is that Tabitha was not only a seamstress. We know that she's a seamstress because at the end or in the middle of the passage, we hear how the women are showing Peter the goods that she has made. Not bought or provided, but made. But there also is a great likelihood that she provided the fabric for the women, that she was what was known as a patron. Now, patron in its strictest definition is a male who supports some endeavor, but during that period of time, it also was for women. From our sermon last week, Mary Magdalene and the other women who supported the disciples were patrons. And so Tabitha is a patron. We get this impression partly because when she dies, it's not just that the women go, oh, we are really going to miss Tabitha. She was a good woman. She worked hard. She did good works. But they are distraught. They don't know what to do. The person who has supported them is gone. Again, much like Mary Magdalene at the tomb last Sunday, her Lord is gone, and she is distraught. The women are distraught, and they don't really know what to do. Now, another thing that's important to know in this story is that Jewish custom is that the body must be buried within 24 hours. So just a little aside, my friends, we are still dealing with the aftermath of the attack in Israel of 2 weeks ago. Bodies still have not been found. And for the people of Israel, the Jewish people, this is not only the heartbreak of losing someone, but they haven't been able to bury them. So in 24 hours from the time that Tabitha died, she needs to be buried. So if they're going to do something, they need to do it fast. They need to do it now. And so we hear that the disciples, now in the Wednesday night study group, this passage really caused a lot of consternation because there's a lot of, well, what does that mean? And who are these people? Where did they come from? We don't know exactly where the disciples came from. However, one thing I do want to mention is that a disciple is simply someone who has learned. They are someone who has listened to a teacher or a master and follows those teachings. So it may be that the disciples refer to the widows. It may be that they the words refer to someone completely different. We don't know. But the disciples go to two men. They send two men to seek help from Peter. And again, I want to put a pin right here. Why two men? Well, number one, that's who is supposed to be taking care of the widows. In Acts 6, the apostles appoint men to ensure the proper care of the widows occur, because it's not at that point in time. No one's caring for the widows. So two men, they go to Peter because they've heard that he's in the area. He's in Lydda, which isn't very far away. Biblical scholars say would take about 4 hours walking and 4 hours to get back. So they gotta get on the move. They must move in haste. So they go to Lydda, they find Peter, and they come back. This story is about many things, and for the most part, this story is lifted up as an example of Peter's ability to be able to perform miracles much like Jesus. But it is not the only thing. The other thing is this is about service. In fact, it really is the epitome of service. We have the service of Tabitha to this community of widows. We do not know why she is important to this community of widows, but she's important. She is not just one of the group. She is their leader. She is the person who will keep them protected and safe. And what I mean protected and safe is they're going to have a livelihood. They don't have to rely completely on the men to take care of them because they're able to do it for themselves. And as a woman myself, I will say that it's important that we be able to do things for ourselves, to stand on our own 2 feet, and to know our worth. Through Tabitha, the widows knew their worth. It also, though, is a story about the service of the men to the widows. They were doing their appointed duties. So there's a cooperation here. And they knew that it was important that the widows have this support of Tabitha. Because they could have just said to the widows, she's just a woman. She can be replaced. But they did not. They knew the urgency, and so they went. But it also is a story of service by Peter to the ever-growing Christian movement. Because Peter had just been healing and performing miracles in Lydda. He probably was tired. He could have very well said to these two men, no, not going to do it. I am not going to, I'm tired. I want to go take a nap. But he goes. And he restores Tabitha to life. He serves this community of widows. So as we celebrate United Women in Faith Sunday, I want to give a little bit of history of that organization because they are people who serve and have been for 150 plus years. So it began with a few bold women, thank God for bold women, determined to change the world for the better. In 1869, Clementina Butler and Lois Parker, wives of missionaries to India, made a plea to a group of 8 women in Boston about the spiritual and physical needs of poor women in India. They could not be treated by men. So the women were dying because no one could treat them. Schooling for girls was almost non-existent, and help was needed. In what would become a lasting legacy of showing up and getting things done, these 8 women moved into action. They called a meeting. Meetings are good for some things. They're not always good, but they're good for some things. They called a meeting. Other women came. They wrote a constitution, and they organized the Methodist Women's Foreign Missionary Society. United Women in Faith was born. By November of 1869, the newly formed organization raised money and sent an educator, Isabella Thoburn, and Dr. Clara Swain to India. The institutions, a women's college and a women's hospital, started by these 2 ladies, still serve the people of India. During this same era, when so many women were being held down by prejudice, by circumstances, other fearless women rose up across the country, and they answered the call to stand up for better lives for women and a better world for all. These include the Women's Missionary Association of the United Brethren Church, which was formed in 1875, 2 women's home missionary societies formed in 1880 and 1890, and the Women's Foreign Missionary Society of the Methodist Protestant Church, formed in 1879, and then the Women's Missionary Society and the Evangelical Association in 1884. These groups of women, while they were not connected, they're important to our history because they became powerful and independent women's organizations. They sent hundreds of women missionary doctors, nurses, and educators all over the world. And they supported countless projects in the United States and internationally, and always they advocated for justice, for children, for women, and disenfranchised communities fearlessly. I love United Women in Faith. Joined by a common faith and single-minded purpose, the Ladies' Aid Societies were started in the early 1900s. When I started being involved in the United Methodist Church in the late 1990s, I still heard about the Ladies' Aid Society. Somebody had to tell me why that was important in our history. The Methodist Episcopal Church and the Evangelical United Brethren Church merged in 1968 to become the United Methodist Church. 4 years later, the women's organizations of the respective churches combined into the United Methodist Women. Now, those disparate organizations that I mentioned that had formed became one. In 2022, United Methodist Women became United Women in Faith. I'm going to tell you, folks, that does not roll off my tongue, because my entire ministry, it's been United Methodist Women. I'm trying really, really hard to change those words. According to the press release from United Methodist Women, the changes are designed to address the different needs and life stages of current members and new women and expand options for membership and engagement. The new name also aims to welcome current members of local churches whose local churches, may choose to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church, as well as other faith traditions, women from other faith traditions who want to join. In other words, the change was to be more inclusive. United Methodist Women knew. They could see the writing on the wall that disaffiliation was going to happen. Did we break United Methodist Women in two and have two separate organizations, or did we make changes to include everyone? The decision was made to change the name and include everyone. The mission, however, remains the same, which is, and most of this information, I'm going to freely admit, came from the United Women in Faith website. The mission, however, remains the same, which is to, quote, seek to connect and nurture women through Christian spiritual formation, leadership development, creative fellowship, and education so they can inspire, influence, and impact local and global communities, unquote. United Women in Faith supports partners. They are collaborative. Their goal is to provide direct services to women, children, youth, and families in neighborhoods around the United States. And internationally, UWF supports partners to empower women, children, and youth with education and economic development opportunities. Further, the members of UWF at home and abroad advocate for a more just world to improve life for women, children, and youth. On the local level, I will tell you, and I'm not telling the members of UWF anything, they're the women who get things done. If you want something done, go to your local United Women in Faith unit, because they are the movers and the shakers. I've served a couple of churches that do not have local units any longer, and they don't move and shake quite as well as the other churches do. Yes, UWF can be bossy women, and sometimes we need bossy women. We need bold women. We need women who can see a greater picture, and that is United Women in Faith. So we celebrate UWF Sunday by honoring the work that it does in local communities and around the world. But unfortunately, I've also discovered another thing in many churches, especially those who have a UWF unit, and it's that UWF is the only organization within the church that's doing such work. And it's not biblical. The Hebrew Bible admonishes us to care for the widow and the orphan and the alien in our midst. The book of James states boldly, faith without works is dead. Jesus says in Matthew 25, as you have done to the least of these you have done them to me. And in our gospel reading today from John 13, he says pointedly, so if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done for you. As Christians, we are called to service, whether we're part of UWF or not. So as with last week, I want to end with some questions. How can we as individuals serve? Well, I'm going to answer that question just right off the bat. There is always a need for people to serve within the local church, whether it's reading, whether it's greeting, whether it's serving on committees, whether it's pruning the roses in the flower bed, or maybe seeing something and cleaning something. There's always a need. What can we do as a church in our community? How can we serve our community? I know we have the blessing box, which is certainly a blessing to this area and this community. But is there something else that can be done? Is there a collaborative partnership that could be developed that would mutually benefit the church and the community? Is there some organization that the church building can be opened up to help serve the people of Northeast Lincoln? Now, this church, as with many United Methodist churches, have lots and lots of space that is unused. What can we do with it? What can we do with the space? Is there a service organization that could use some of this building, even if it was for a day? Some churches have blood drives come in, or they have health screenings done. They set up in the basement or in the fellowship hall. I don't know yet what all this church does. I haven't been here long enough. So maybe this church already does something like that. But it's something to think about. How can we use the resources that we have at hand to serve the church and the community? What ministry or mission in this local community has been left undone because nobody is doing it? The other thing about United Women in Faith is that most of the members are older, and they don't have quite the pep that they used to, and they can always use some younger blood. So perhaps it's simply get involved in your local unit so that you can begin to make a difference. As we go forth into this week, I ask that you ponder the story of Tabitha, who was so important to her community. They didn't want her to die. Folks, I got to tell you that if I died, I don't know that there would be anybody who would go rushing to someone else to say, you got to save her, because I'm so important to them. But for Tabitha, it was a reality. They wanted her saved because she was important. She was important to them. She was important to the community. She was important in serving the kingdom of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.